On our last show, Josh gave us the scoop on hiking the stunning Via Algarviana in Portugal. Around the same time, I interviewed a woman named Margaret about walking holidays in general. I found out that Margaret had hiked the middle section of the Via Algarviana with her daughter, so I thought I would add her insights to my own Algarve experience to give you a more complete idea of how you too can enjoy a vacation in this beautiful area, even if you only have a week's vacation instead of close to a month like Josh had to do the whole thing. So we're going to do things a little bit differently today. First, we'll hear from Margaret about her 8-day hike of Section 2 of the Via Algarviana, and then I'll tell you about my own recent visit to the region, including hiking the stunning Seven Hanging Valleys trail that you can do in a day. So whether you just want to have a base camp like I did to explore and hike, or even all 3 sections of the Via Algarviana, you can plan an epic trip to sunny, friendly, affordable, and I might add tasty Portugal. So let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. Before we get started, I want to remind you that I do a free travel planner for each adventure that we cover on the show. So if you haven't done so already, you can get access to these travel guides by getting my once-a-month newsletter. And note that I do only email once a month. I don't spam you. I hate getting bombarded with all that stuff when I sign up for an email, so I'm trying to treat folks the way I want to be treated. So on generally either the first or second Thursday of the month, you'll get a note from me that includes the travel planners, plus other random travel and personal thoughts. You can sign up by clicking the link on the show notes, by email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and just letting me know, or by clicking the newsletter button on the activetraveladventures.com website. Of course, you can unsubscribe at any time, so please check it out. Now let's get on with the show. The Via Algarviana is a 299-kilometer long-distance trail that tracks mostly inland away from the crowded beaches. The trail is broken into 3 sections that can be done in 8 days apiece. So if you're short on time, just visit my affiliate One Foot Abroad's website to see which section best suits your needs. Our guest Margaret did the middle section with her daughter, so we'll not only learn about the trail, but also about family dynamics with traveling with your adult child. On this hike, One Foot Abroad makes all the arrangements for you, so all you have to do is walk. They move your main luggage each day to your next accommodation, so you just carry a day pack. They provide maps and instructions plus 24/7 assistance, and they can help you figure out which trip is right for you. If you use my exclusive promo code ATA5, ATA5, you'll also get 5% off any of their tours and be helping to support the program at no additional cost to you. Now let's hear about Margaret's adventure. So we have with us Margaret today, who's going to tell us about her adventure on walking the Via Algarviana with her daughter. Welcome to the program, Margaret. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
My first question is, if you don't mind, I'd like people to get an idea of who we're speaking with. If you wouldn't mind perhaps telling us your age and do you do these adventurous kind of things all the time, or just a little bit of your background and on this kind of thing?
Sure. So I'm in my early 60s. And my daughter, who came with me, this was a year ago that we did this, was in her mid-20s. So yes, I have done a lot of point-to-point walking trips, especially in Europe. And actually, we lived in Switzerland for many years. My daughter Maggie actually spent most of her childhood there. So we did quite a lot of hiking living in Switzerland. But actually, her father and I had done long-distance walking trips before that. Yeah, but mostly in Europe. I live now in Portland, Oregon, where I hike a lot, but it's a different kind of hiking. It's more of a forest, wilderness, coastal kind of hiking, not this point to point going through little villages and being out in the countryside or the wilderness, then back into little village and then to the next one.
What do you find is the appeal of this long distance hiking?
One of the very compelling aspects, one of my observations, is that Europe was settled at a walking pace. That's my observation. So you walk a few hours and you're at the next village. And then you walk a few hours and you're at the next village. I find this walking to be very contemplative, actually, that you really slow down and observe what's around you, hear the sounds of nature more. And this moving forward, I find quite compelling, that maybe you don't spend very much time in one spot, but you end up being in an area for an extended time as you move on, because you're moving at a very slow pace. 8, 10, 12 miles a day, which of course in a car you would do in 10 minutes, right? So I find the pace compelling. I like the back and forth, mostly between villages and countryside. And when traveling with someone else, you end up having conversations that you might not otherwise have, because you're just walking along and looking and talking.
I'm going to come back to that later, because I think the dynamics of doing an adventure like this with your daughter is extraordinary. But I want to still spend a few more moments on what it's like when you come to the villages. How is that exploring other countries and seeing a country by foot versus the regular tourist track?
Yes. As I was saying, you see overall less, but you see it more deeply, I think. You absorb the environment more. You're more likely to encounter maybe more people who live in rural areas. And then when you get to the villages or cities, I mean, sometimes the point to point can involve cities also, then you have a sense of what city life is like also. So one thing I would say is that this trip that Maggie and I did, and a couple of others I've done, have been through services that carry your stuff from place to place. I want to make that clear. We were not carrying everything on our backs. So then it's super relaxing, because all you have is a day pack with you, and your stuff is waiting for you when you get to the next inn or hotel or wherever has been booked for you. So you also have a bit of a lighter feel going through places, because you're not burdened down with schlepping your bag.
So what made you all choose this particular hike?
Okay, that's a really good question. And here's the story. So a year ago, or a year and a half ago, when we planned this, my daughter was living in Copenhagen, Denmark, and I live in Portland, Oregon. These are both cold, dark, kind of grim places in the winter. And we had decided that we would meet up for vacation in February. And we both decided that what was very compelling to us is to be somewhere with assured sunshine. It did not have to be hot, but we wanted sunshine, and we wanted it to be warmer than where we lived. And we wanted to do I think it was my idea, and Maggie was fine with that, to do maybe a walking trip, so that we would not only be in the sunshine, but we would be actually out in it. And so I contacted the tour group, One Foot Abroad, that they had done the logistics for a Camino Way walk that I had done. And they had many guided or self-guided point-to-point walks to choose from in Europe. And I talked to them about this desire that we had to be for sure sunshine. We didn't want to do a guided trip because we wanted to spend the time together, the two of us. And even though it's a lot of fun to go with a group, and I've done that before, for this trip, we wanted it to be ourselves. And we needed it to be a place that we could both get to. I was coming from the US, and actually I was not so much the constraint, because I had time and could get anywhere. But Maggie there's a daily flight that time of year from Copenhagen to Faro, Portugal. So the booking service helped me settle on this particular trip. And I had been in Portugal before, and so had some sense of what it was that we were getting into. Another factor is because we were going to be doing this towards the end of the winter, both of us felt that we would not be in our best shape. For me, even though I hike year round, it's not the same in the winter. So didn't want to do anything too difficult. And Maggie, living in Copenhagen, realized that she mostly rode a bicycle. She didn't actually walk that much in her daily life. So we had these factors: sunshine, easy for the two of us to get to by ourselves, not too difficult.
So on the scale, since we're talking about difficulty, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being, say, Mont Blanc or something killy or something really hard, and 1 being couch potato, where would you put this?
Oh, it's a 2.
Okay.
I would say, I mean, it's mostly country roads and some kind of cool old medieval paths, some of the villages. It's more of a rolly countryside. For me personally, my favorite walking is a rolly countryside. If something's too flat, that's actually rather hard on your legs after a while. There were some hilly bits, some steep parts where we're going over hills. They don't really have switchbacks. We're living in Switzerland. We were used to these kind of well-engineered switchback. It's more up than down, but this was no alpine hiking, believe me. And so I noticed that looking back at our itinerary, the booking service described all of our days as easy except for one moderately difficult. And I think that was more for the distance. That was like 19 kilometers or something. It was the longest of the days.
And did you do the entire trail or a section of it?
Oh, that's a good question. I believe the entire area is 300 kilometers. We did about 85, and we did a middle bit. And that also the guide service helped me settle on that when talking about how much time we had available and so on. So we did like the middle 80 plus kilometers.
And what kind of landscape did you see there?
So it was a lovely countryside. There were really interesting old olive and carob orchards and old fruit orchards and still working cork and carob orchards. Some of the landscape was really just kind of scrubby hills in the distance while we walked in valleys. There was one part that's actually a nature preserve. This was actually our favorite part. It was following a stream along a valley where there was the scrubby hill on either side of us, but kind of verdant where we were walking through. And this was actually in between two villages, as I recall. One little part was along a river. So it was not an enormously varied landscape, but there was some variety. The other thing that was striking to me is this southern coast of Portugal, parts of it are incredibly touristy. And it was fascinating to me to be only a short little drive away from this whole touristy area and be by ourselves in a rural area that felt so different. For part of in the early part, we could actually see from the hills where we were, we could actually see the coastline, and to think that there were these like teeming beach towns down there where we were really all by ourselves, more or less, with the birds and occasional horses and so on, was a special aspect, I think, of this via also.
Did you see many other fellow through hikers, I guess, for lack of a better word, or who did you see along the path?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I make it sound like we never saw another person. We didn't see lots of people, but we did see that's a good word for it. There actually were some through hikers that were doing either a longer part or maybe even the whole thing. There were a few other people who were even through a different guide service were doing some of the same bits we were. And for a couple nights, we would be at the same. And I actually love that aspect of doing these point-to-point hikes too, the people who you end up encountering. Interestingly, I think almost everybody we encountered was Dutch. So I'm guessing that they had a bit of the same criteria that Maggie and I did, which is we want to get out of our dark, gloomy climate and be in the sunshine, have it not too far away. We didn't see any actual guided group. Everybody who we saw was doing their own, where they were also booked and their stuff schlepped from place to place. I did see one guy who was carrying his stuff the entire way. And a couple of places where we stayed, there were people who were just staying there. One of the things we realized is that we were really never cut off. I make it sound like we were all by ourselves. We weren't around a lot of people during the day, which was very nice for this kind of bonding walking. But we were never far from other people. And we pretty much had phone reception the whole time if we'd really had some kind of a problem. And we did happen to encounter people sometimes when we would get to a place where signage was a little bit confusing. We almost always just happened that there would be somebody else there and we would kind of work it out among ourselves a little bit. So we would see people occasionally during the day while we were hiking. And as I said, they were almost all Dutch, which was kind of fun.
That's nice. Now, what is the dynamics of spending that kind of time doing something still difficult? It may not be killer to you, but it's still difficult every day to get up, put on your shoes and hike for 10 miles or so with your daughter all the time. I know you love her. What is that like? I mean, you might hike at different paces. You might have different times you like to wake up and be cheerful in the morning or cheerful in the evening. Can you talk a little bit about family dynamics?
Yeah, that's a thoughtful question. So we have walked together a lot, traveled together a lot. I would say we have a compatible desire to get up and get going. And when I say get up and get going, I don't mean necessarily in a cheerful, oh, it's a new day, but get up, eat breakfast and get on the road. That was sort of our family style. And we still have that. We're okay with silences, maybe me less, you can probably tell because I'm the one doing all this talking here. But I think that's an important part of this kind of longer walk, which is there's room for silence. There's room for walking along together with your own thoughts in your head, and you don't have to be talking all the time. We were there at a time I would not recommend to people, and that was like Carnival week. And the reason I say that is that every village was having its own carnival celebration, and we happened to hit every one of them on our points through. So there was a festival in every town, which sounds like a lot of fun. But the issue is the restaurants were super busy or were already booked up or were even closed. And so our lunch was provided each day. This was totally seamless. Each inn or guest house or hotel made our lunch for us and handed it to us before we started that day. But we weren't able to experience what would have been usual, which is, sitting outside at a restaurant in the little town. We had to scramble a little bit in some of the places to find a restaurant where we could eat. And one place we ended up, it happened to have a kitchen, which was wonderful. And we were actually able to go to a grocery store and make our own dinner. The reason I bring this up is because I think part of the companionable act of this kind of walking is you walk all day and then you get to your place, you clean up. A couple of the places had swimming pools, you could swim. And then you would normally have a pleasant dinner to unwind. And we didn't exactly have that. I think it's only because of that week. I highly recommend this trip, but I wouldn't do it during that 1 week. So we had a little extra bonding, you could say, on trying to figure out our dinner every night. And if one of us was getting a little exasperated about why are we having to go through this, then the other one would be, hey, it's going to be okay. We'll figure it out. It'll work out. So I think sometimes having some complications on a trip can bring you together also.
So would you say that you were closer and more bonded at the end of the trip than you were at the beginning?
Oh, maybe. I think this is not so unusual for us to do that there would be a radical difference. But I definitely felt this real quality time that might not be the case if we had just done a city trip together where you're going from site to site.
Right, that makes perfect sense too.
Yeah.
So our conversation on this is kind of tied in with the other, so I won't be asking you a lot about the lodging and the food and the rest of the train. So if you could just give us some of your impressions and advice that you might give somebody considering this, of what they should think about.
One thing would be to pay attention to not do this carnival week unless somebody found that to be very compelling, that would be a very fun thing for them. The other is that the weather was ideal for us. I imagine very much farther into the spring, it maybe gets too hot. I very much appreciated our luggage being taken from point to point. I highly recommend the segment that we did. This middle part really made for a nice week. The other thing is that the booking service recommended, and we actually spent 2 nights at the place where we ended and did just a little countryside circuit from there one day. And on my own, I probably wouldn't have thought to kind of park ourselves at the end, but it was very relaxing and gave kind of a nice transition back to regular life. This was hardly regular. We were in a lovely place out in the countryside they had delicious food and it was really great. But I found on other walking trips, sometimes you walk, and then you find yourself at the airport and you fly home. And this little decompression time, I would recommend. Yeah, those are the main things that I can think of.
Of the trips that you've done, how does this one compare and would you recommend it?
So I would recommend this. This is one where the walking was certainly very easy. The service we went through used an excellent local service that specializes in sustainable tourism, and they met us personally, gave us a wonderful overview. We had one point where the signage disappeared and I was able to call the guy. He talked us through it. And so in a way, it was an easy entry to this kind of long distance walking. Neither of us speak Portuguese, but that wasn't an issue for us. If somebody's looking for an alpine experience, that wouldn't be this. If they're wanting from French cathedral to French cathedral, this is really, to me, a special part of Europe that has this strong Moorish influence, and would recommend it. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time, Margaret. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I appreciate Margaret coming on the program. Before I talk about my own adventure, let's review a couple of takeaways that Margaret mentioned that apply to any vacation. Number 1, check the calendar of events for the area that you're heading to. Maybe you want to be there during a carnival, but maybe you don't. Number 2, remember when things go awry, the complications can bring you and your partner or group together. And usually the things that go wrong is where the stories come from. Number 3, if at all possible, take a day or two to decompress at the end of your adventure before you head back to the craziness of life back home. You will be really glad that you did. Number 4, take advantage of your tour company's local expertise to help you select the best tour destination for you. They can also help with side trip and rest day reservations. And they can save you a ton of time and hassle to help make your vacation more stress-free. So here's a little bit about my own adventure in sunny southern Portugal. I headed to Portugal from Spain last winter at the tail end of my Balkans trip. I had some time left in the Schengen zone, and I wanted to see if maybe I wanted to retire in Portugal or maybe Spain. The Schengen zone is a group of European countries that Americans can visit without a visa for a combined 90 days out of 180 days. On the bus trip to Tavira, I noticed a nesting stork on top of a power pole. I look harder, and I see lots of others are doing the same. On this stretch, virtually all poles have been claimed by storks and have a single bird standing guard. Here, the land is flat, filled with greenhouses, olive groves, and verdant farmland, and orange groves loaded with ripe fruit. I actually like travel by bus and train. It allows a country to introduce itself slowly to you instead of bam, as soon as you come out of the airport, there it is. As we near the Portuguese border, the flat land tends to give way to small rolling hills, almost like tall green sand dunes. But as we enter the Algarve region, the hills get taller, many terraced with orchards, vineyards, and crops. It's quite beautiful, and I am smitten. The area has an old history peopled with the mysterious Celtic tribe of Tortesos, the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Moors, and finally Christian Portuguese. A terrible earthquake in 1755 demolished the area, so most of the architecture you see now is Moorish, which has this exotic whitewashed appeal. But there's also an abundance of Christian churches. I believe that the relatively small town of Tavira has 38 alone. Sadly, many of these magnificent buildings are turning into museums as fewer are attending Mass. While I spent some time in Tavira and Faro, my main focus for this part of Portugal was Albufeira. I secured a beautiful oceanfront apartment for a week in the heart of town, so everything was an easy walk. Visiting in January, however, also meant that many restaurants were closed for the winter, which is something you need to consider. Albufeira is a charming tourist town filled with restaurants, gift shops, and of course, a beautiful beach. The main thing I wanted to see during my visit was the famous cliffs. As a teenager, my family stayed here for a week in my uncle's former home, and the only thing I can remember about the trip was how beautiful the cliffs were along the ocean. Now that I hike, I wanted to walk the famous Seven Hanging Valleys Trail. It's about 7.5 miles on top of the cliffs. Getting there without a car was a bit of a problem. I didn't see where a bus went there easily, which I thought was puzzling for such a popular place. So I took a taxi to the main trailhead only to see a bus stop. At least now I knew how I'd be getting back home. As per usual, I got there early to avoid any crowds, although it never got crowded all day. The trail itself is very well marked, and the few places I wasn't sure, you end up just joining the trail again, so there's no need to worry about getting lost. I pinned my location so I could find the bus stop, and I'd earlier downloaded the trail on my All Trails app so I could use it offline just in case it wasn't well marked. You are mostly walking on hard sand, so it's easy on the feet. But you are exposed all day, so a wide-brimmed hat and plenty of sunscreen is in order. Also pack plenty of water. You do go through a town or two, so if you don't want to be bringing lunch, you can go out to eat, and it looked like there's some nice options. Sometimes you're in the brush and the scrub, but mostly you're walking along these towering cliffs that I would say are at least 100 feet tall. The ocean here is a tealy green, which really makes for a nice backdrop for the sandy beige and brown cliffs. One of the most striking views is at the beginning, where the land just juts out into the sea. So you get this great sideways view of the cliffs. Of course, the waves and the wind have battered them, so you get some cool nooks and crannies and caves as well. The most famous erosion on these cliffs is called the Bengali Caves. You actually see these caves best from a boat ride, which I took from the Albufeira Marina. It's hard to describe the Bengali Caves, and I'm going to try. So picture these tall cliffs, and then a very large mass of land jutting out from the side of the cliffs. Almost, I'm going to say, picture a beach ball, okay? So water and wind have created this huge donut hole in the top of the beach ball, and then the waves have carved caves on the side. So it's like a huge beach ball made out of Swiss cheese. And the light from the top hole lets you get a clear view of the interior of this magnificent landmark. But be sure to check out the photos on activetraveladventures.com so you can see what I'm talking about. I have some great photos in there. From up on top of the caves, you can see some of it, but there are some safety railings because the soil is obviously very unstable, and thus you can see into the Swiss cheese holes. No matter how you see it, though, it's pretty cool. This is one of my favorite hikes ever. I loved every minute of it, and while I saw others, it wasn't bumper-to-bumper hikers as I worried it might be. One benefit of being in off-season. When I got back, I saw two people looking like they were waiting for a ride and asked them if they were waiting for the bus. They said there was one due at 3 p.m. that would take me to a larger nearby town where I could then get a cab or wait for a bus to take me to Albufeira. I will admit to being underwhelmed by the public transport in this, Portugal's second most popular tourist area besides Lisbon. Looking back, I would say that Seven Hanging Valleys Trail was one of the definite highlights of my Portugal trip. The next day, I booked a Jeep inland safari. My group included 2 high school friends getting together after years apart and an older couple. We head away from the coast and into the acres upon acres of orange groves, olive trees, and cork farms. I can't stop looking at the striking young woman in the seat in front of me. She is a young black woman with the most beautiful smile and face and legs up to her ears. As we get to know each other a little bit, the older woman in my group finally asks if she is a model. Her girlfriend whips out her phone and says, "Yes, she is, but look, here's a photo of her on the cover of Elle magazine." I gotta tell you, I wasn't surprised. She was a stunner. Our ride into the countryside was pretty and informative. We learn olive trees are very long-lived. Portugal claims to have an olive tree over 3,000 years old. Can you imagine the history it's seen? We pass one orange grove that has over 100,000 orange trees on it. And the fruit is ripe right now, and each of those oranges have to be picked by hand. The cork trees are the most interesting to me. Portugal produces about 50% of the world's cork. One of the best things about cork, outside from being a good earner for Portugal, is that it's sustainable. The trees aren't cut down or damaged when the cork bark is harvested. The tree can be harvested every 9 years for the lifetime of the tree, which is roughly 270 years. But you have to wait 25 years after planting the cork tree in order to start harvesting. It's got to get strong enough and mature enough. And if ever you wanted to cut down a cork tree, you actually need a permit from the Portuguese Ministry of Agriculture, and it's illegal to cut a cork tree down without one. Another tree we see is a lot of almond trees, which surprised me as they don't get a lot of rain here, and I'd heard that almonds use up a lot of water. Our guide says they need a lot of water in the beginning, but then they're tough and drought resistant. The dirt here's got clay soil on top of limestone, so it holds the little water that they do have pretty well. He says these trees can go 6 months without water, which is important when you get 300 days of sun. The almond trees were also in full bloom, which was beautiful. There was a cool legend I'll share with you. There was a Moorish king who, while conquering the Algarve region, saw a beautiful fair-haired blonde woman from up north, and he gave her her freedom. Eventually, a trust was formed between the two, and they married. But the queen was sad because she missed seeing snow. So the king ordered the land to be planted with almond trees as far as the eye could see. And when the blossoms fall to the ground, the land does indeed appear to be covered in snow. And thus the queen's sadness parted. When we stop at a local shop for a coffee or snack, our guide recommends we try the local almond liqueur. It's only 11 o'clock in the morning, but when in Rome, or rather in the Algarve, I ordered one. The drink is served in a short glass with a massive square ice cube in the middle, as well as a sliver of lemon peel. It tastes like almond extract combined with corn syrup, and it would make an excellent substitute for rum and a rum-type cake. We stopped to check out carob trees and learned that all carob seeds weigh exactly the same, and were once used as weights. You can grind the seeds to make a very healthy flour or use as a substitute for cocoa powder. It's a very valuable crop, and Portugal produces about 30% of the world's carob. It's also an attractive tree and used ornamentally. Our guide explains the typical house coloring. Yellow window trim is good for fortune, and the blue scares off bad spirits. White reflects the heat, and the thick stone walls absorb the heat and keep the home cool during the day and release the heat at night. All I know is it makes for a very cheerful and charming look. You also notice all the elaborate chimneys. Around here, the builder asks how many days you have for him to spend on the chimney. The price obviously goes up the longer he takes, so the rich can show off by ordering several days' worth of chimney build. Another thing I found delightful is if you haven't been to Europe, know that it's comprised of lots of stairs and steep hills and roads. Since many villages are so old, some streets are too narrow for a car to fit. They're often covered in cobblestones, which makes for cute streets that are easy to repair, but are bare on your feet. So as you age or develop mobility issues, Houston, you got a problem. The solution in this town was to have a mobile van that goes and does the grocery shopping for those in need. It also offers some socialization for the elderly. It was a great solution, I thought. I found my Jeep tour interesting, scenic, and I would recommend it. And I definitely also recommend that you take a boat ride to see the Bengali caves that I spoke about earlier. It's really the best way to see this incredible landscape, really a sculpture. At first, the ride will take you out to sea to look for dolphins. We didn't have any luck, so we headed back to shore to explore the magnificent coastline. I saw what looked like tiny ants up in the cliffs, but it turns out those were the hikers like me the other day. The marina area is nice as well. You get to see all the pretty boats and have a nice meal in the water. On Thursdays, I think it is, the U.S. expats get together in the afternoon. It's quite a large group, and you'll hear them, and they welcome visitors. and it was fun to speak English for a change since I've been gone for almost 5 months at this point. The marina was about a half-hour walk from the old town where I was staying, but they also have hotels down at the marina if that's your preference. There's a reason southern Portugal, and in particular the Algarve region, is so popular. You can visit it any time of year and expect nice weather. Me, I would avoid the summer months when the Europeans arrive for their summer holiday. The beaches are nice year-round. So you can base yourself in a town in the Algarve like I did in Albufeira and take day trips, or there are several active holidays that you can take like Margaret did. One Foot Abroad offers these self-guided adventures in the Algarve. One or all three of the sections of the long-distance trail via Algarviana that we've been talking about, an 8-day cycling trip of the Algarve, a walking or cycling of the Ruta Vicentina Fisherman's Way, which I covered on episode 38, I'll put a link in the show notes, or an interior 8-day walk of the beautiful Alianteo area. Remember, too, if you book with One Foot Abroad or even their sister company, Follow the Camino, you can get 5% off by using the promo code ATA5, ATA5, and you'll be helping the show at no additional cost to you. Links to everything will be in the show notes, which you can find by scrolling down your phone or hitting the information button. It's that little I in the circle button. Be sure to check out the website for photos and more information about this strikingly beautiful region. I hope you've enjoyed your visit to the Algarve. Thanks to Margaret for coming on the program and allowing me to relive some of my adventures there as well. And thank you for listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!